I mean, usually what happens with a proposed pipeline like this one or any large development project is there's an actual proposal, a detailed proposal that looks at, a whole variety of issues, everything that would be covered by an environmental assessment process. And the terms of that are set by a public consultation process where people are asked what their concerns are, which is run by the government, usually through the National Energy Board and the provincial and federal government. What's going on here is a sales pitch from the company, but none of those details have actually been provided. So they're basically just showing us a very, 10,000 feet, very vague kind of map that just kind of gives you a view of where the existing pipeline route is.
To play devil's advocate, though, couldn't that be seen as, hey, we're giving you a heads up on, what we're thinking, so, before we actually go through with it?
Well, I'd see that two ways. First, if they're genuinely planning to go along the existing route, that's they've got what my grandmother would call a lot of chutzpah. This pipeline is literally going through, countless backyards. It's going through, dozens of farms, of schools, of areas that are, very important to people, through housing developments. So I think it's foolhardy to suggest that they would actually go along the existing route, because I just can't imagine that anybody is going to be happy about that for much of the pipeline. So I think a much more sincere way of looking at this, and I think this is kind of the second part of the 2 points I was saying, is that they're planning to actually go somewhere else. And if they are doing that, usually what would happen is they present their actual plan, a detailed plan saying, this is where we actually think we can get this thing built in a realistic sense. And if they actually, have a plan that's very different than this one, then it's a tremendous waste of time and energy. Because they really should be showing people this is exactly where we think this should go, and then you'd have an opportunity to say, well, this is the problem I have with it. This is, but right now you're looking at a map, you don't even see what street it's on, you don't see what community it goes through, you don't see whose backyard it goes through. You wouldn't see that it goes through the schoolyard. Looking at the maps that are in there, we're literally sitting in a school, and it's not telling you that the pipeline's running through the backyard of the school we're in. So to me, that's just not an effective process. It's a disingenuous process, and I think the more realistic look at what's actually going on here is they've got a little counter in there, counting every person that walks in the door, and they want to go to the National Energy Board and say, we consulted this many people. And whether this is actually any kind of real consultation or not, I just don't see this as being a meaningful consultation. The other thing is that they're not presenting the other side of the story. There's no opportunity for anybody with concerns other than us standing around outside to actually get any of the other side of the story. So then they ask you to fill out a brochure with a bunch of leading questions in them when you've only heard one side of the story and really didn't get any details. And now that's going to be seen as sort of you being consulted on a pipeline project without any details. So they're putting the cart before the horse. They're doing consultation without any information, and they're doing it without the involvement of the government, which really is just not the way that a process with such a controversial pipeline project should be done. In today's day and age in a modern democracy, we should be having the final say about whether this goes forward or not. And this process really doesn't provide you an opportunity to say no. It just provides you an opportunity to give kind of meaningless feedback without any information, so that they can pretend that you've been consulted.
So what are some of your specific concerns to this proposed pipeline?
Well, ultimately, we need to be reducing the tar sands. It's one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gases left on planet Earth, and I think we in BC have a choice of whether we want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. So in terms of the big picture, none of these pipelines are a good idea. But then there's also some very realistic, sort of localized concerns. This pipeline goes through the most densely populated parts of the province, carrying extremely dangerous toxic chemicals. And if there was a spill, God forbid, anywhere along the pipeline route, the impact would be pretty severe. So we just want to make sure people really understand the risks and what's at stake. In particular, we're here at the school today, because this pipeline actually runs by, a number of schools in the Lower Mainland area and elsewhere along the pipeline route. And in fact, this school here has the pipeline going right through the garden in the back, which is a beautiful organic community garden. So this school is just one of the many schools that is at risk of, for one, having a big part of their grounds dug up for the sake of the pipeline, if the new pipeline actually did go along the existing route, but also faces a risk of exposure to toxins and all the other things that come with an oil spill. So we just want people to be acutely aware of the risks that they face.
Well, Kinder Morgan highlights its safety record in not having a spill, and that with all the technology and stuff that they could respond extremely quickly, and everything's up to industry standards and all that. So how do you respond to that then?
Well, I mean, Kinder Morgan is trying to make the case that they're better than Enbridge. And Enbridge has gotten so much bad publicity as of late. I think we're going to hear more and more of this in the years to come. The truth of the matter is, though, that there's no such thing as a safe oil company. If you want to reduce the risk, you reduce the amount of oil that's passing through your community. Kinder Morgan's had their fair share of problems too. They just recently paid a big fine in the United States in the millions of dollars for safety issues. They had a pipeline explode in Nevada. There's a court case also in Nevada with a group of children, and one child in particular who died of cancer. Who's now taking Kinder Morgan to court. So I mean, this is a company that has far from a squeaky clean record. That being said, there really is no such thing as a safe oil company. BP said that they had the world's leading safety standards right before, the biggest environmental catastrophe in the history of the United States. And these two incidents with cargo shipping vessels up around the Douglas Channel earlier this week, I think just further highlights the risks that are beyond the control of any company.
Now, this is twinning the Trans Mountain pipeline. So this pipeline itself hasn't had any major problems that I'm aware of. So isn't that safety record, I guess, speaks for itself?
Well, I mean, first of all, there has been a number of incidents with the Trans Mountain pipeline. There's been 4 incidents on Sumas Mountain alone. One of them was quite severe. Another one happened just recently and led to the a number of people having to stay inside for a whole school day, a couple days, and a number of people saying that in the time it took them to walk from their front door to their car in the morning, they felt nauseous. So it might have been a small incident, but to the people in the area, it was definitely far from insignificant. Of course, right here in Burnaby was the site of the 2007 spill. Once again, a small incident, but if you ask the people in that area whether it was insignificant, they tell you something very different than that. And there's been a number of other small incidents, in various places along the pipeline route in its 60 years of existence. The good thing is that we've been lucky in the last 60 years that there hasn't been a major incident. There hasn't been a big-scale spill. But this pipeline does run along a series of fault lines. There could be an earthquake that could have an impact. It's also a 60-year-old pipeline, so sooner or later, the sort of regular wear and tear on this thing could lead to a leak, like happened with the Kalamazoo River spill. Kinder Morgan can say all they want about their safety standards, but the truth of the matter is that there's no such thing as a safe pipeline. And really we've just been lucky as of yet. If we really want to reduce the risk, the best thing to do is just to reject this pipeline proposal.
Then how do you say to the sort of balance of risk versus economic benefit, the risk-benefit analysis?
Well, quite frankly, I think this pipeline is actually bad for Canada's economy. If you look at what's being said about Dutch disease, about this idea that being reliant on the export of a raw resource is actually driving up the value of the Canadian dollar, which is pushing away manufacturing jobs, is hurting small businesses. I mean, Canada's a country made up of small businesses, and we don't do nearly enough manufacturing. So this is definitely really good for Kinder Morgan's bottom line. I mean, this is a company that's now one of the biggest pipeline companies in the world, based out of Houston, Texas. But for your regular British Columbian, I mean, I think this is going to hurt small businesses. I think this is actually, might create some short-term jobs, just like any construction would. But in terms of the ongoing operating, not a lot of jobs. Probably the biggest number of jobs is cleaning up an oil spill, and those are jobs I hope we never get.
We've mentioned like just over there's the community garden, and the pipeline runs underneath it. And from what I've been told, the pipeline was here first, and as urbanization spread, then communities grew up around the pipeline. So doesn't having that pipeline there over the garden, or under the garden, doesn't that say to something about the confidence in the pipeline and the safety?
Well, I think, for many years, this province is built up with very little knowledge about even where this pipeline was. And I think the way that we've thought about sort of the oil industry, about the risks associated with it has really changed drastically in the last decade or so. Climate change has only become something we've really become aware of in a real serious way in the last decade or two. The big oil spills that happened in the last couple of decades, Exxon Valdez and the BP disaster in Kalamazoo, these are all relatively recent occurrences. So I think sort of the level of concern, the level of awareness of pipeline issues is really peaking at the moment. So perhaps people were less worried about these things in years gone by. And I'm sure there was probably, tax advantages and property value advantages to building somewhere where a pipeline ran, because, ultimately most people don't want a building on top of a pipeline. But I think it's a shame that there actually is so much risk. I think a lot of these schools were probably built in the wrong places, frankly, because there is an existing threat, an existing risk with this existing pipeline. And building a new pipeline, which presumably will run somewhere close to the route of the existing pipeline, although that's yet to be seen. And actually one of my biggest critiques of this whole process is that we aren't even being presented with accurate maps of where this pipeline is going to go. But a lot has changed in this province since the pipeline was built. As you pointed out, I mean, much of the schools, let alone the homes and the golf courses and you name it, just simply weren't there, before, when the pipeline was originally built. So it's a very different province and a very different route that they're trying to build this pipeline along than it was when it was originally built.
Now, you said you don't know where this route is, but isn't that because it's such an early stage of the process that nothing's finalized yet?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Which is why I think it's too early to be doing public information sessions. I mean, to me, to really sincerely engage with the general public, you need to say, okay, well, here's a detailed area level map. Which it does not exist anywhere in that room. If you go in that room, you'll see kind of the 10,000 feet view, but you won't see the where exactly through whose backyard and what neighborhood and what schools and what malls and what farms actually have the pipeline running through it. So I mean, first of all, you need that level of detail, and I mean, yeah, they need to be getting feedback from the general public, but this isn't the way to do it, as far as I'm concerned. This is really more of a focus group or a sort of a sales pitch. They're trying to figure out how better to sell the pipeline would be I think the accurate way to portray what's going on in that room. It's not sincerely about trying to figure out what would be the least harmful way to do this, and quite frankly, I mean, part of this has to be an opportunity for people to say we don't want it to happen at all, which is not part of this conversation. It's really, what color do you want your pipeline to be, and that's really just not a fair conversation. And to see any child dying of leukemia or other forms of cancer is horribly sad, of course, and we just want to sort of make sure that there aren't the same sorts of risks here.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I think just that whoever's coming to these public sessions needs to remember that this isn't a government process. And we're encouraging people to demand that there is a real meaningful, ongoing public consultation process, and that perhaps the government should be pushing back and saying that it's not appropriate for these kinds of sessions to be going forward without a government process. That the federal government's desire to sort of streamline, quote unquote, the environmental assessment process, doesn't mean that we should be able to have these kind of pseudo consultations where there isn't real information being provided and there isn't really anybody who has the ability to act on our behalf that's even involved. To me, that's just inappropriate.
And what kind of reception have you been getting at these information meetings, since you're obviously against the project?
Well, I mean,
for the company, I mean.
There's kind of a mix of people in the room, to be fair. There's the public relations people from Kinder Morgan who, are pretty much on message, as they say. We just kind of hear the same talking points over and over again. There are some folks who are from Trans Mountain, who are the engineers, who are a bit more detail-oriented, and you can have a bit more of a meaningful conversation with them about some of the details, at least, of the existing pipeline, which I think for a lot of people who live in and around the pipeline and probably haven't had that opportunity to talk to those engineers can be useful. But, I mean, that's a totally different process. That's talking about the existing pipeline, not talking about a proposed one. So it's a shame that people have to come to a proposal for a new pipeline even to get any information about the existing pipeline. But, I'd say overall, everybody's trying to be friendly. I mean, we're not here to shut down the process. We're not here to, be disruptive. We're just here to make sure that people are getting both sides of the story. And, I'd say the reaction from people who are attending the sessions has been quite positive. And in terms of the, the folks inside, I think they appreciate that we're not here to shut them down.